I think one of the biggest things I want people to know is, one, you're not broken, and two, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just about you really just haven't been given the tools and the strategies to understand, one, how your mind works, why it does what it does, and also two, why your body needs proper nutrition.
Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Meet Medic podcast. Now today I'm joined by my very special guest, Natalie West, who is a clinical psychologist and a nutritional psychologist, which is really interesting. I think we're going to learn a lot today from Natalie. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Suresh. It's amazing. I've been watching your journey too, so it's great to chat.
Yeah, and I've been watching you. We said before we started recording that we've both kind of been keeping an eye on what each other's doing, and you certainly post so much amazing stuff on your Facebook feed, which is really incredible. So I'm learning a lot from you, and I'm hoping to learn a lot more from you today. So look, I guess like I did with all my guests, maybe if you can just start a little bit with a bit of your background, short or long story, doesn't matter, and what's kind of led you on this journey to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for me, I was in corporate for 20 years. So lots of, sales, lots of corporate, operational management. I started kind of my career when I was 18, so very young. And then, 20 years later, I'd always been very fascinated with the mind and the body. And, I've got medical practitioners in my family, and it was just like, I didn't know whether I could go, to be a nurse or whatever kind of came into my path. But after 20 years in corporate, I just decided that I really wanted to do something different. And the trigger point of that was really when I had my first child. So at the age of 33, I was just, I don't want to work for anybody anymore. And, even though I loved the psychology of sales and all of that kind of thing, I just knew there was something more. But also, too, I come from a bodybuilding background. So I was very focused on fitness and health and things like that. Also family history of mental health issues. So I'd always been kind of surrounded by varying, degrees of mental health. So I always knew that, exercise and the way we eat. And also too, I grew up in the 70s. So, it was pretty standard for us to eat meat and 3 veg. That was kind of our, no processed food. So I was very lucky. I kind of look back and I think I'm very grateful for that. And also too, cost-wise, back then it wasn't really, monetary to, put into healthy food was more of an option than buying processed takeaway foods like it is today. So for me, it was just really by default. And I always say to people, I think your passion and your career kind of finds you based on, your own personal experiences. So for me, being in the bodybuilding industry, I didn't know at the time before I went through my psych and, all my other training it was a very external validated process. And I didn't realize that at the time. And it was a very conflicted, negative self-image that led me down that path just to, get your body into a certain state, but also too, not knowing what I know now about how you eat as a bodybuilder. If I knew that then, I would have never have done it, because it led me down a very, very unhealthy path of disordered eating, really unhealthy relationship with food, counting calories, constant constriction. So then that would lead me to binging, and then I would go and exercise. So I had this dichotomy, and then I actually ended up going down the path of the psychology route first. But something in Miss Suresh was always like, something wasn't clicking for me. And then I ended up, again, by default, going to a seminar where there was a psychotherapist there who also was talking about orthomolecular nutrition. So as we know that now, that's, psychiatric nutrition. So for me, it really made me understand that, we have a whole being as a body. We just don't have a head that we just need to talk to psychologically all the time. And, he had said to me after that 2-hour seminar, Natalie, if you really want to give power to people to heal themselves, it's not always in their head. And I was just like, oh, what does that mean? And he was like, your gut's your first brain. He said, your gut-brain axis is one of the most powerful relationships that people have to understand. And that's where, 90% of, nutritional deficiencies come from when we connect to mental health. So I was just like, wow, I hadn't heard of that, because in the psychology model, we don't get told that. We don't get told, we actually do get told the opposite, to be honest. We get told that that doesn't work. That's more of a placebo. Gut-brain axis doesn't affect depression or anxiety. It's a DNA thing, or it's a generational thing, or it's trauma. Trauma, yes, but DNA, now I'm kind of really deep into that. Kind of know that's really not the gig. So for me, it was just really having that exposure. And then he'd said to me, you also have to understand how to teach people how their minds work, not just come to therapy and talk and leave and come back and talk and leave, because you're not allowing anyone to understand conscious, unconscious. Also, your body also has unconscious memory systems. So it's an energetic space which we have to really understand. So that really led me down the path of understanding what orthometric nutrition was and nutritional psychiatry, and really understanding emotions behind why we eat, why we drink, why we anchor things in, processed foods and alcohol, or even drugs sometimes. So, and 17 years later, this is where I am now. So I've been in this field 17 years, and it's always evolving. And I always love, helping people understand that even back then, when I first started, asking people what they ate was very unusual. People would be like, I've never been asked that question. Why are you asking me that? And I'm like, well, it's kind of important.
Yeah,
so I was a little bit of an anomaly back then. I was just like this lonesome wolf out there asking people like, great, let's talk about your mental health, but tell me what you eat. And I still ask that question today.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the maybe second or third question I often ask people, after, hi, what's your name? I know their name anyway because they're booked in, but what do you eat? It's so important. It doesn't matter why they're coming in almost. Do you think you're still a lone wolf, or are there others out there like you that are exploring this side of things now with diet and nutrition when it comes to mental health?
I do believe so. Like, for example, people like Georgia Ede and, Dr. Chris Palmer, they're kind of, I guess, the pioneers of really combining, mitochondrial health, metabolic health with mental health. They go hand in hand. They don't operate on their own individually, and you can't just treat one individually. But it's really funny you ask me that. Like, I know a lot of practitioners around me who are also very integrative. So they absolutely understand the connection between mental health and metabolic health, but also too, from my psychotherapy point and my psychology point, it's also allowing people to understand their thoughts, feelings, actions, behaviors along with what they're eating, and understanding the mind's a framing process. So we have to make gaps in the frame to make changes, because otherwise we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. I actually have a lot of people reach out to me through Instagram as well. So a lot of social workers, a lot of counselors that really have understood now, I guess, being in the industry, that they're in and what they're treating, and understanding that, hold on, I'm missing a huge piece of the puzzle here. And also, too, when we talk about food, we have to really understand what species appropriate means versus what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is it that you are currently eating now then? I mean, I kind of know from following your Facebook and so on, but maybe if you can tell our viewers, our listeners, what it is that you're eating after this journey and where it's led you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm full carnivore. I've been carnivore now for over 4 years. So my diet consistently is of eggs. So that's, five to six eggs in the morning. It really depends on, if I'm hungry that much, with some butter. And then I'll eat again maybe between 4 to 5. And that's just generally beef or lamb. I don't have any more butter on that. I just have the meat fat. And really, that's it. I'm pretty much satiated and fed that way, and have been for, as I said, 4 years. I'll have some feta every now and again, just Danish feta and olive oil. But for me, experiencing my kind of binging disordered eating patterns when I was a bodybuilder. So as a bodybuilder, my diet was just full of high carbs and chicken. I don't even eat chicken now. I can't even stand it. Sorry for all the people out there that like chicken, but I just have overdosed myself on chicken. But it was eating every 3 hours, and then that led me into a really bad situation with my health. I ended up literally borderline diabetic, where I went for blood tests one day and I'd woke up and my face was numb. And I'm like, something's going on here. But unfortunately, before that was with lockdown, and I'd kind of, as we all do, being locked inside, I'd kind of started to eat sourdough bread. And then that just got me into trouble. So I went for tests and he come back and he said, yeah, you've got the celiac response. That's an inflammation. And also too, your your insulin was really high. So it kind of made sense to me now, but back then I didn't have the qualifications or the understanding that I do now. So it did lead me into a very kind of precarious space. But the doctor at the time had said to me, oh, we'll just keep an eye on it. And I'm like, no, actually, we're just not going to keep an eye on it because I need to reverse this. But by default, I did reverse my insulin resistance, but I also reversed my asthma, and my all my allergies disappeared. I had very severe hay fever, to the point where I'd be on hay fever medication every day. Since going carnivore, that pretty much all disappeared within 6 months.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I was just saying to a patient the other day the same thing, that a lot of people on carnivore find that their hay fever disappears just because it's something that's maybe external. That's, we're not eating tree pollen and grass pollen and whatever else that hay causes hay fever. But I think it's just that recognition, that something sensitizes the system, kind of builds that baseline, maybe inflammation, whatever it is.
I agree, yeah.
And then that just kind of comes on top and then sets it off, really. So, I mean, you mentioned a lot there. I mean, obviously coming from a bodybuilding background and disordered eating, that is something we hear a lot of in the bodybuilding community. A lot of people out there talking about this, and it's really is a problem. Interesting. You said, that you were eating for every 3-4 hours, that fuel the furnace and all that kind of nonsense.
Keep your metabolism up.
Exactly. You got to keep stoking the fire, keep putting coals in the fire, all that stuff. And actually, it was actually causing you more and more problems and actually worsening your metabolic health.
It was. I looked good on the outside, but was I mentally good on the inside? Absolutely not.
Right.
And understanding what a negative self-image and quite a conflicted one, which is, again, what I teach people around their programming, and their programming really is given between the age of 0 to 7. So a lot of that programming that we learn as children, especially around how food's used and exercise. So for me, I just thought that was normal, that, okay, yeah, we eat every 3 hours. And however, the one thing that really I started to question was I would eat, and then within about 35 minutes, I was starving. I was just like, hold on, something's not right here. So then that was that insulin resistance, understanding that, oh, that's what's going on, right? So once I pulled all that out, just all disappeared. And I have not counted calories now for over 4 years. So that was a daily thing for me.
Yeah. How does that feel?
And it's also daily for my clients too that don't do it anymore.
Yeah. How does that feel to come from that background of, disordered eating, counting calories, counting macros, and then to just not have to do that anymore?
It's just freedom. It is just so free. And it's funny, I joke now, but I'm like, my head has so much more space available to do different things than to think about food. I don't think about food. I just, that primal instinct that you get when you start eating how a human is meant to eat, you just understand the primal hunger signals and go, right, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to eat until I'm satiated, and then I'm stopping. And your brain loves that, right? And the other thing with being in ketosis, I cannot even quantify, my life before to now of how my brain operates and how my body operates. And I'm still weight training, but I do it from a very different space now. It's more connected to my mental and metabolic health, and as it is with all of my clients. So anyone that comes to me that kind of has seen what carnivore does, but if their first spot for me and I hear that it's a diet for them, then that's an alert for me, because that's past pattern program of jumping on diets to force your body to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
That's never going to work, and it doesn't work, because if one diet worked, we would never have the 500,000 of them that we do. It's about resetting that unconscious mechanism so you have to eat and move based on your values, but also mental and metabolic health must come first. End of story. And your body by default will do exactly what it needs to do. And everyone's so unique, as you know, Thresh. Everyone's got very different things going on, but ultimately, let's lose inflammation. Let's lose, the attachments to really crappy processed foods that we shouldn't be eating. They damage our brains.
Oh, they absolutely do. You mentioned there that, keto or being in ketosis, carnivores allowed you to kind of do so much to expand your brain and push out all that stuff you don't need. I mean, you do a lot. I mean, you're a clinical psychologist, clinical psychotherapist, nutritional psychologist. I forgot to mention all of these things in the intro. Self-image specialist, international speaker, columnist. I mean, I thought I did a lot.
I'm very busy.
You're certainly very, very busy woman. You're doing a lot. Sought after facilitator, speaker, international speaking, and so on. I mean, that's a lot. You think carnivores has really helped you with that side of things as well?
Totally changed my life personally, but also too, it really allows me to be grounded, but have so much energy to actually put in the work that I need to. The amount of hours sometimes that I do a week, if I'd kind of look back on my corporate history, I would be, lying on the couch, not being able to move. But now it's just a normal space of vibration that I now sit in. Yeah, certainly I understand my foundations where I need to go to reset. But secondly, I'm also a very big faster. So I also use hormonal fasting, especially with women. Hormonal fasting is very powerful, but people have to understand their hormones and how to fast correctly, especially with being in ketosis or not. There's come a couple of things there. But it's a level of energy that, as you know, it's very difficult to put into words. It's a whole new way of being, really, mentally, physically. And I haven't even been to see a doctor apart, for 4 years, apart from just checking in on my bloods when I first started, just to see where I was and to look at my markers. But even, I'm 51, so I'm kind of on the other side of also with women with, menopause as well. So carnivore and eating this way has totally, Natalie, really saved me from going through all of those horrendous symptoms that most women unfortunately go through.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely want to talk about that. I mean, I'm just looking at my big screen down here. I mean, you don't look 51.
Thank you. Carnivore, what have I called? I've said it the other day. It's the kind of the Benjamin Button way of eating, the kind of reverses,
aging backwards. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I look at photos from me, and I mean, when I was in my 20s, I was a little bit slimmer and so on. I'm still on that journey now, but like just my skin and everything is just so much better than it was back then. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I look back on pictures of myself, and my whole face, like especially my jaw. And that's the other thing, because you're chewing. We're meant to chew a lot. That's a primal instinctive thing. But jaws and your teeth get better, and, everything just gets better. And I see clients, that start with me, and then 3 weeks later, I see them on the screen and their whole inflammation in their face has disappeared. And they're like, this has never happened ever. I'm like, I know, this is what happens when you eat like a human should.
It's incredible, isn't it? Do you talk to your patients, clients then about carnivore? Is that something that you do bring up with them?
Well, people generally know by listening to any of my podcasts or looking at my work. That's a hand-in-hand process for me. It's either low carb or into a carnivore way of eating. And when they find me, they kind of know that's kind of where I sit, because I know it's the most powerful to really reset a lot of these patterns and behaviors. And then, once we kind of go through that over a 6-month period, it allows people the freedom to go, you know what, if I'm going to add something back in, I have to honor the feedback and the value that I'm getting and really understand why I'm doing it, to make sure it's not a society-driven thing. It's got to be an internal value relationship with your mental and metabolic health. So there's no point adding back in, if you've not eaten bread for 6 months and then you eat it and then all of a sudden you feel really flat and depressed. Well, we've really got to go, well, you can't eat that. You have to eliminate it. And that's the other thing too, language-wise. We're so driven to think that balance and moderate is normal. It's not. It doesn't exist, because we can't have a level of moderate addiction or a moderate level of type 2 diabetes. You have to eliminate. And I know that brings up a lot of psychological components with people with eliminating things, because we've got to understand the emotion attached or anchored to that. But once you let that go, and it's freedom of choice to go, well, I know that that's not going to serve me well. That's a low vibrational choice versus staying in a carnivore, heavy protein way of eating, and being in ketosis is the key. That's the key, to allowing people to understand when they aren't and when they are, how different that feels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right there. I mean, the idea that we, just balance or moderate unmoderatable, foods is number one, just never going to work. These hyper addictive, hyper palatable foods. But, it's like saying, well, just moderate, meth or something. I'm not encouraging people to take meth. YouTube, no. Don't ban me, YouTube. But it's like saying, just thing. This hyper addictive food, just don't eat it very often. It's very, very difficult for people. But the other recognition there, I think you're right. Some food is just not good for us, on a population or an individual level. And I think, we do need to recognize, okay, well, if food actually harms you, maybe just not eating it is actually okay. You're allowed to not eat something.
You are, but also too, if we go back to our programming in the way as children as we've seen food, so a lot of the dialogue we hear, like, if you don't eat that, you can't have your dessert. Right, automatically you're in fear of, like, now I've got to shove this awful food in. For example, like, if you've ever watched a kid eat broccoli, they screw their face up because it's bitter. Let's be honest. Give them a piece of meat and they don't screw their face up. We're not meant to eat bitter things. That's why a lion in the jungle, give a bit of kale, it's not going to eat it.
Probably not, no, unless it's wrapped around a deer or something.
Correct. Well, because you know why? It instinctively knows that's not good for me. But as humans, we've lost that. We've lost that instinct. And it's funny, I want to talk about a client really quickly. I'm so proud of him, and it's very relative to what we're talking about. Been seeing him for 12 weeks. He's in the US, and he said to me this week, he goes, Natalie, he goes, it's the first time I've walked down the chocolate aisle. He goes, and I all looked at it and I was like, no, 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 no. He said, I just had this instinct that I knew that was not good for me. He goes, I never thought that would ever happen. He goes, it's so freeing.
Yeah. How powerful is that? How amazing is that?
It's so, like, I got, goosebumps and everything when he told me, but for him, watching his face, he said, I knew that I heard you say that in the beginning. He goes, but I was like, oh, really? That's a kind of a far stretch. But now he'd experienced it. He's like, why would I ever want to do that?
I know, that's just so incredibly powerful. And it's touching, because I think probably yourself, we've all been there. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. Just, that realization that actually that is just not food.
No.
Maybe I just shouldn't actually eat it. And that's like, wow. And that is very, very freeing.
It is. And one of the other things as children, we're also taught that if something happens to us, if we cry or we fall over, we're given treats. Like, we're given really sugary, bad things. And again, we shouldn't be given treats. We're not animals, right? If something's happened, you need to go through the emotion that whatever is happening at that time. But if you anchor it or blank it out with something that is going to give you a taste bud reaction, you're immediately building a profile of every single time I'm emotional. That's the filing cabinet pattern that you'll develop, and you'll just go to that immediately every time. Mm-hmm. And as kids, when we're starting with that taste bud addiction to sweet, sugary foods and salty things, and by the way, companies know what they're doing. It's called a bliss spot point. They spend billions of dollars to get this right. So you can't just have one. You'll have the whole packet.
That's right.
Right? They've got customers for life, right? So it's about understanding too the dopamine hit reaction that we have, and we're in such a dopamine dominant society. Yeah. Everything around us is just firing it all the time, and alcohol, food. But you know what? The other element of shifting out of moving away from that is getting that dopamine back to the right levels is how you're meant to earn it. You're meant to earn dopamine. You're meant to actually work for it, not just sit in your couch, get a delivery from Uber Eats and get stuck in that mentality.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about dopamine. I mean, I've been doing a lot of work on dopamine lately, and a lot of the work I do with patients on sugar addiction, food addiction, is around dopamine, other addictions as well. And it's probably how Carnivore helps with other addictions. I know Dr. Sean Baker talks about it in his book. Questions, we don't know why, but we know it does happen, that Carnivore Diet helps with addictions. I mean, I think it's dopamine most likely.
It absolutely is. And also too, even with alcohol. I've worked with many clients that have, had really strong alcohol issues, and being carnivore within a 6-week period, all the desire for that disappears. But I also think too, what it is, again, alcohol is just sugar, right? So again, we've got some hypoglycemic issues going on there as well. If you look back historically, if someone has a really high processed sugar diet as a child and as a teenager, and then they get into alcohol, that's the same root cause, right? Yeah. However, we've got emotions on top of that too. But it's also about the amino acids. Like, let's talk about, how powerful red meat is with the amount of amino acid it has in it, which then, when we eat and our guts get better, and then you've got the neurotransmitters that are actually all firing. Inflammation is one of the key things too, I think, with addictions. Like, once they start to get that down and their body starts to feel better, it opens up a window for their psyche to go, oh, actually, hold on, something's changing here, because you cannot ignore a physiological, biological response in your body. Mm-hmm. You just can't. So when that starts to feel, and what I love about how I work is, you're giving the power to the person to go, you are opening that door for you. Mm. It may feel uncomfortable, and your mind and your body is not going to like it because it's unfamiliar. But where the unfamiliarity is where the growth is. And your mind has to be in a space of the unknown for things to change.
Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful. I definitely want to talk a lot more on the actual science of diet and nutrition when it comes to mental health, if you're okay with that, Natalie. But just quickly, I want to go back a little bit. You've mentioned a number of times around children and touched on emotional eating and the psychology of eating. I want to discuss that a little bit more if we can. So, I mean, what's your take on feeding kids and this idea of, you have to finish your plate, you can't have dessert until you finish your meal, you have to eat your veggies, otherwise you can't have the treat. I mean, what's your take on all of that side of things?
Well, seeing, how that affects people as an adult, I'm very, very hesitant around that. It's something that, whereas a child will eat when they're hungry, but if they're actually eating processed foods, their hunger signals and their primal instincts are going to be all mixed up. So I'll always say, when a child is capable, being able to give them good quality protein, to allow them to understand where that satiating mark is, but not use narratives or anchors around food as a threat. Because once you do that, what happens is, if you're sitting there as a child, even as an adult, even people I work with are like, I've got to eat all this because then I can have my ice cream. It's still embedded that far down. I'm talking, people in their 40s and 50s, right, that still have this anchor. But because that attachment is, well, if I do this, then I'm good. I've earned that. And this is the problem. We're earning in the wrong way. So, no, I think the way children should be able to listen to their hunger signals and eat when they're ready and stop when they're not. Because guess what? As a child, they'll just say, hey, yeah, I want some food or whatever, but it's what you give them is going to be the key, whether they register their signals or not, their primal instinct. So I'm always for low carb kind of, cucumbers and good yogurts and berries and lots of good meat, whether it's chicken, lamb, beef, give it to them. Because the thing is, I would rather a child have a whole plate of meat and then they'll eat a little bit of cucumber and they'll have some yogurt with it, but allow them to guide where they're at. Don't force or push. And also, too, make sure that in between that, you're not feeding them really high-based, non-nutritional foods. Like, you've got to look at the content of nutrition. So like a piece of white bread, there's nothing in that. All that does is turns to sugar, right? Raises your insulin. But if you've got to have that, make sure there's good protein with it, good fats with it. Give children fats too. Like they need fat.
They absolutely do. I mean, fat is incredibly important for brain development. If you look back through evolution, of course, human evolution really skyrocketed when we started eating fat, primarily from the brains. That's when human evolution really skyrocketed. You mentioned there about using, food as both kind of treat and punishment.
Yes.
That was I wonder if you can expand on that. That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah. So, for example, it's a treat, like if a child falls over, or if you do this, I'm going to give you that. So it's like if you do your work or your homework, I'm going to give you a treat. And normally it's shitty food. What that does, that builds up a programming to state that kid, so every single time I do something good, I can have that. And that's why I was saying before, even adults, if I do good at work, then I can come home and I can have a wine, I can have something else. It's that's the emotional connection. We're not actually looking at what do we need to reframe to change that pattern. So as a kid, don't give them food. Tell them you're proud of them. Tell them, wow, show me what you did. Get them involved in the process instead of them going, wow, I did that, but now I get that, because that's going to disappear and they're going to be stuck in this, because then the whole dopamine hit just takes over. So that will be an ongoing process. So treats, no. Punishment is also too, as you grow up, again, if you've had a parent that's been on a diet and it's all about losing weight, getting into a certain size, then food is seen as punishment. So don't eat that, you'll get fat. That's going to make you, I've had one client that was told that, if you eat that, no man will ever love you.
Wow.
Could you imagine what that has impacted her, right? So as much as we sometimes think that words or narratives that come out of our mouth mean nothing, every single person that, especially in that 0 to 7, no one has the ability to cognitively filter out, well, that's not mine, that's just mum in a bad mood or dad in a bad mood. So all of our authority figures have such a big capacity on our value structures. So a lot of the time it's hitting back to, well, food is a higher value than me or what I've done, because we've anchored that behavior outside of ourselves. So anything to do with validation, bodybuilding industry, validate, but we're all not well inside. We're using that as an anchor, again, reward. But you don't get the reward from it. It keeps you in a very bad spiral.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure I'm probably guilty of that with my kids. I try very hard not to. I am very conscious of that. And I don't blame my parents at all for my issues. But I do think that a lot of my issues with eating stemmed from that mentality of you can't have that until you've had this. If you finish all your vegetables, you can have the sugar, the treat,
Correct.
and so on. So,
and we also too, there, Suresh, we go into like food insecurity. People can get really attached to it because it's like, oh, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to get it. So it becomes a very anxiety-driven place to be. And one thing I really want to touch on what you just said then too, when I talk about authoritarian figures and how we program and how our minds work. It's more about understanding that, your parents or whoever, your authoritarian figures were, they didn't know any different either, because they were also conducively from your grandparents, right? So again, it's understanding what's unconscious patterning versus conscious patterning. But the thing is too, I always say to people, where you are right now happened because it happened that way and it didn't happen any other way.
Yeah.
But your power now as an adult is to understand that's not working for me. And my values are outside of myself, which will never work, especially when it comes to food. If you've got a value of food, if you go to a barbecue and all that food is looking at you and talking to you, your value's lost. It's in that.
Yeah, I think power is a really interesting word there as well, because people often feel like, oh, it's their fault that they can't eat properly, or it's their fault that, that they have the power to change means it's somehow their fault. And then they go into this negative spiral, and I try and say, look, it's not your fault, but you do have the power to actually make that change.
100%. And I always, the freedom of what my clients end up having is, if they make a choice, it's got to be a conscious choice. It's got to be, hold on, where's my why? What's my value here? What emotion am I in? If I'm stressed or angry, they know I'm not going to anchor it again in something that I used to do. But there's a very certain foundation that I take people through. But again, the amount of shifts and change that you can make in your life from waking up your unconscious programming to become very conscious in your choices. And it's the same with me. I'm a mum, my kids are now 17 and 13. And, I kind of look back and I never used high sugary treats because that was just not what I learned, right? But I want parents to really understand that, no, you don't know what you don't know until you do.
Yeah.
So don't take on guilt or shame, because they're useless emotions. They don't do anything but anchor the same unconscious pattern and behavior. But it's about talking to your kids, telling you're proud of them. If they do something, just don't give them a chocolate.
Yeah, very, very wise words, I think, there. I wanted to get into it, if we can, a little bit more about the nutritional aspect then of mental health and psychology. And you touched on a few things there, like amino acids. Of course, we've spoken about meat. How important is our nutrition to mental health?
Well, it's been around for a long time, but I guess, what we've got to do is pull away narratives, I think, that we've been led to believe that there's no connection. So if I get you to think even about, orthomolecular specialists, we're back in the 1900s, like Linus Pauling and Abram Hoffer have been talking about the power of nutrition for a very, very long time on mental health. And, they're also psychiatrists. So this is not new. But I think, again, what we have to do is understand, if we go back to the basic core of fundamental, our body is a chemical factory and it needs the right chemical, input with messages, which comes from food. So I always, tell my clients that all the messaging that you have in your hand that you put into your mouth, whatever you're choosing, has either high vibrational messages or low vibrational messages, which then will not convert the right chemical reactions that you need in your body. So again, we've got to go back to removing emotions for a sec. But when we talk about depression and anxiety, they're the top two. And then if we go up to things like, schizophrenia and those kind of higher levels of schizoid disorders, I always look at them as a huge side effect of something deeper. There's a root cause that's been going on. Yes, there's a psychological component, but, what I find that doing this for so long, I would say 80% of it comes from a biological underfed problem and nutritional deficiency. And I know nutritional deficiency sounds quite weird in the Western world, but we actually are starving. And we have been for a very, very long time. So, if you look at a supermarket, I always say to people, if you're shopping in the middle aisle of the supermarket, you're nutritionally deficient. If you're looking around the outsides, obviously meat, dairy, that's perfect. It's been around for millennia, let's be honest. And whatever you're going through yourself in relation to low carb. But as a human being, I think where we lose the connection is, again, what we're led to believe that, we have a pill to solve that problem. Now, that's going to treat a symptom. Maybe you may have to try 3 or 4 for that. But in the history, and if you look at nutrition and all the research that's coming out now and all the studies, especially with ketogenic, way of eating and even into a low carb, things are changing. Like people are reversing things like schizophrenia and schizoid disorders and depression they've had for many years. And we'll throw in the word that it's antidotal, but I really don't think right now that we need, a peer-reviewed study. Oh, sorry, there goes my camera. To prove that this works, So again, we've got to go back to, where do we learn how to eat? Why are we eating? Where have we lost the mechanism to understand that our brain needs to be fed, and it does not like as much glucose as we're led to believe? You do not need glucose. Your body will make glucose for you through gluconeogenesis. That's what it's designed to do. And also too, if we look at a utero birth state, we're actually in ketosis when we're in utero. And when we're born, we're in ketosis. And when we're breastfed, for example, if that's an option, that's full of saturated fat. You're in ketosis. That's a birth state.
Yeah.
But then what happens is we shove cereal into kids, or rice cereal and things like that, and we've really got to get back to those basic mechanisms of a human species, as in look at the connections between the society now. We're getting sicker and sicker mentally, metabolically, and it's not from a lack of medication. It's from a lack of proper food and nutrition.
Yeah.
So, it's a no-brainer for me. I've seen it over and over again, as you would have. Some people don't like to hear it because it does cause resistance. But again, it goes back to, how about going on a ketogenic way of eating, or even a low-carb way of eating, and you determine what the truth is.
Yeah.
Instead of allowing the power to be set in something that's not working.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I think it goes back to, again, what we said earlier, touching on, it's not just because people have the power to make the change, it doesn't mean it's their fault that they've not done this to themselves. That's a very negative way. There's going to be people out there thinking, oh yeah, they're kind of just blaming what I'm eating, and blaming me for my own problems. It's not what it's about at all. It's just saying you have the power to make that change.
Yeah. And, one thing I really want people to understand too, when it comes to mental and metabolic health, I think a lot of people think that they need willpower. It has nothing to do with willpower. Willpower doesn't work. You really have to understand the mechanisms of how your body works. And, this is about educate yourself on, hold on, if I've been told that cereal is more of a dessert, but I'm eating it for breakfast, but we're being led to believe that, Wheat Bix is okay, or Nutri-Grain has protein in it. Okay, we've got to kind of step back and go, let's read the ingredients. If there's 500 ingredients in there that you can't pronounce, those message signals, your body's not going to know what to do with that. It has no concept of that is not food. If you're eating not food, you are going to be nutritionally deficient and malnourished. Malnourished is probably the best word.
Absolutely. Overfed and undernourished, I think, is
correct.
The popular terminology. And that is absolutely right. Western world, I'm sure you see it, I see it all the time. Overfed, undernourished, this kind of thin on the outside, fat on the inside, tofu, whatever you want to call it. Definitely is the case. I mean, you mentioned there that anecdote, certainly carnivore and mental health. Look, it's mostly anecdote, but there are studies out there. There are peer-reviewed studies. There are meta-analyses that do show that nutrition is really important.
It is, and I think
health.
They're the ones that are kind of pushed to the side, I guess, a lot of the time. But there's a study actually which probably a lot of people don't know, but there was one done in 2022 out of France by Dr. Dan. Have you read that one?
I've not, no, but I can link it in the description if we can find it.
Yeah, so it was also in conjunction with Dr. Georgia Eade. So I can actually send you the link to have a look at it. But
please do, yeah.
Now, it was a small cohort, but there was 28 inpatients that had bipolar, major depressive issues, and also schizophrenia. So they put them on a ketogenic way of eating. And also too, if we look at the power of being in ketosis, and, even if you look at epilepsy, they've used ketogenic diets with epilepsy for many, many years because of seizure control, right? So if we look at that, we're like, well, if that's working in that space, what is it going to do on the brain of someone that's possibly has schizoid disorder or depression or whatever it may be? So literally 100% of those people had improved symptoms. 96% of them lost weight by default. But again, that's inflammation, right? Let's look at the body as getting rid of the bad fat. And over 64% of those patients left on lower and discharged with less medication.
Yeah, which is unbelievable.
And that was just food.
I know. How powerful is that? And yet we just say, no, nutrition makes no... There's still doctors out there that say, nutrition has no role in chronic disease and mental health. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
Some psychologists do. I know some. And they think I'm batshit crazy.
It's absolutely insane.
But I'm like, hey, you talk to my clients and you determine if I'm batshit crazy, if they've changed their life around and reversed depression, anxiety, and disordered eating that they've had for 20 years.
Yeah. It's insane, isn't it? Let's get a little bit more into the science, if we can, Natalie, if that's okay with you. What is it about meat that promotes mental health?
Well, if we look at meat itself, so red meat is the only bioavailable source. So when we talk about bioavailability versus non-bioavailability, fully access to the body. So for example, if you look at meat, 9 amino acids, right? If you look on the spectrum of anything else, there is nothing that holds all 9, right? In, say, a 350 gram piece of meat, right? Does that make sense? So then when you eat all of those, and then they are actually the precursors for the neurotransmitters that we need. So for example, my mainstays that I always talk about is obviously dopamine, serotonin, GABA as well, which is a really important pathway for mental health. But again, when we talk about depression, and we would have heard this as well with the science around chemical imbalance in the brain, because it's a serotonin issue, 97% of your serotonin is made in your gut, and it's driven by what we eat. But we need the precursors of the messaging signals that I spoke about before that come in amino acids, which have to be then in the gut. If you've got a leaky gut, we have to treat it a little bit differently. But most of the time, even if you do have a leaky gut, full meat is enough for the body to then start sending those right messages. It takes time. And this is the other thing too. We've got to understand, if you've eaten your way into malnourishment for 20 years, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 4 weeks' time, right? It's a process. So the other thing that's been vilified for many years is fat. The amount of deep nutrition that is in fat, DKA. And that's why we always say, if you combine the red meat with all the amino acids, but then also to the fat with that, that's the powerful source that you need, right? If we look at other things in low carb, depends on what it is. Like I'm talking about the fact that where the person is individually is to where we take them, whether it's fully zero carb or a small amount, right? If you're coming off a SAD diet, I normally gently do it, but it depends on how big their threshold is. And they're like, no, we're going to jump into zero carb. So in doing that though, it's also educating the person to understand, when I eat something like red meat and fat and your brain feels amazing and your body starts to feel better and you're grounded and you're sleeping and your cortisol starts to shift, that literally is enough for people then to understand, okay, hold on, I'm not feeding myself correctly, right? So for me, my core thing is teaching people around what amino acids are, what for example, like tryptophan, right? So you need those things, and they come from meat. And they're bioavailable. So for example, if you're even talking about iron, heme iron versus non-heme, say in spinach, which then you've got all the oxalates and all that on top of it.
Absolutely.
It's not bioavailable. And I know people can argue this point that, your body can absorb what it needs. But from what I've seen, and, I have worked with very many people that have been plant-based and vegan that have been very, very, very sick. And it's not because they didn't do it properly. Yeah. That's the other thing that we hear. Again, there's a lot of disordered eating patterns as well in that kind of cohort. Yeah. So again, dairy, whether or not you can tolerate it or not, again, it's just about the individual factors of that. Some people, it can trigger sugar reactions, funnily enough. There's a bit of a morphine reaction sometimes in cheese that some people can have. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of that?
Yes, no, definitely cheese has an opioid-like activity, which is partly why it's so addictive.
Yes, exactly. I'm not a big fan of it. It's just not something that I enjoy. But the mental health really the biggest component is getting that amino acid nutrition to convert those neurotransmitters correctly. Now, sometimes you may need a bit of support with extra magnesium or other things, sometimes like L-theanine or taurine, all of those things that kind of help and support that nervous system. But again, when you become very conscious in understanding why you're doing what you're doing when it comes to mental health, because mental health, we're also told that you've got to live with it, you've got to manage it. Mm-hmm. And that's not true.
No, and we're always told, it's a deficiency, chemical imbalance in the brain, whatever you want to call it. We know that's not true. We touched on that earlier as well. Look, in the interest of fairness, I'm sure, I don't know how many plant-based people there are out listening to this podcast. I don't know, but there are going to be people saying, "Oh, well, I read you can get all the essential amino acids from vegetables as well." You can. Things like buckwheat, for example, it does contain all of those 9 essential amino acids. But the difference there is they also come with a ton of these anti-nutrients, like the oxalates that you mentioned,
phytates, lectins.
Absolutely, which are going to disrupt the absorption, the leaky gut syndrome. They're going to affect the absorption. Protease inhibitors that quite literally stop the digestion of those essential amino acids, or at least the protein breakdown into those essential amino acids. So you might not even be absorbing them. They may be passing beyond your teeth.
Correct.
But you're not actually necessarily getting them.
No. And I think probably there's a very small amount of population that probably thrive on maybe eating that way, but I don't think there's many that can actually do that without a huge amount of supplementation. And I always say, if you have a huge amount of supplementation in your diet, something's wrong. You're not getting what you need. And again, we've got to err on the side of the beliefs that also come with that, and beliefs are very, very difficult to break, even though your body may be breaking down. But if your belief is stuck in something, that is also going to cause a disruption. But I also believe it is about education of understanding, plants just aren't plants. They're not this, innate thing that, we've been led to believe that doesn't cause harm. They do. And again, we've justified bloating. Like if you eat a meal with huge amounts of fiber and you're bloating, and then we're told that that's normal, or you're passing wind all day, every day, that's not normal. Mm-hmm. So, and people generally find, again, once you shift to a higher protein fat way of eating and kind of reduce all of that, the amount of shift in that is just night and day.
Yeah. People kind of wake up and go, oh, wow, like I wasn't actually meant to live that way.
Yes, good point. Because a lot of people, we're so conditioned to live in a state of where we are without realizing there's so many more phases that we can go into as a human and literally live way beyond the energetic means you ever thought was possible. And it actually only comes from food and moving your body and making sure that also when we talk about inflammation through food, we also have to get rid of inflammatory thoughts, inflammatory things that we say to ourselves, comparing ourselves to other people. That's also a big no-no. Even on a low carb or, carnivore way journey, your journey is yours. You must own it solely. Do not compare. Do not say, oh, that person's lost weight or that person's reversed that. Own your path. Do it in conjunction, in love, with your own body. And that's the other thing. People don't love themselves. They don't love their bodies. The amount of people that I hear that really put their bodies down is also a pathway to not healing either.
Yeah, no, it's very nice to hear you say that. A lot of people that I see, they are comparing themselves to others. They come in saying, I see all these people losing loads of weight. Why can't I do it? And it's like, well, your body's different. You've had different genetics, different epigenetics. You've eaten different food. You've been exposed to different things. Your journey is your own. And it's not actually very healthy to compare yourself to other people.
It isn't. And one big thing too is cortisol. I don't think also that's spoken about enough in relation to how our body will not lose weight if we're in a high stress cortisol state. And one thing in the morning, as we know, our cortisol kind of peaks between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And when we wake up, if we've had a stressful day before, we've gone to bed in stress or anxiety, then we're waking up in it, but we're not using the cortisol. So really, I say to people, if you can and you have a lifestyle that allows it, you've got to get up and move within that first 2 hours of when you've woken up, because if you don't, that cortisol doesn't get used and it just gets laid down. So then if you're trying to lose weight and your body's inflamed plus cortisol, it's not going to happen. And that's why people then go on crazy, silly diets and then try to reduce their calories without actually understanding your body's doing what it's designed to do. It's trying to protect you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was why really ultimately calories don't really work.
No.
Because of this hormonal control of weight. So we've touched on a few things there. I mean, you mentioned, of course, meat's very, very strong for mental health. You mentioned all the 9 amino acids there, especially tryptophan, of course, as a precursor to serotonin. I mean, you can't expect to produce serotonin if
you don't have tryptophan.
You don't have the building blocks, the
Correct.
tryptophan. Absolutely.
Correct.
And you're right as well, of course, that whilst the body can produce some things, it can't produce those essential amino acids. And tryptophan is an essential amino acid. We have to get it in the food.
Yes.
I often hear this, people, but your body can just make it. And this is an argument that like plant-based people have for things like EPA, DHA rather, sorry. The omega-3s. But it's just the body doesn't quite work like that. It'll make the bare minimum.
It will make exactly what it needs to make to survive, as I call it, but it also needs help from us to actually get the nutritional source that it needs. That's why meat's there. That's why it's been there for millions of years, right? Now, if we look in a supermarket right now, none of those things existed. They're all man-made. They're all made in a designer factory, right? Cauliflower is not real. It's not normal. It's made up, right? But it is about understanding that if you're choosing to eat what you're eating currently and nothing is changing, then I think this is where we have to pull back the curtain and go, right, you have to really look at, is this the level of state of being that you want to be in forever? You don't have to be. No, you don't. You can. It's your choice. But I think the ignorance comes from understanding too, when it comes to eating meat, around all the other narratives as well, which I think is, again, very precarious to talk about. But again, we've just got to make sure that, we're giving people the correct information. And, again, I'm like, go research, you go do it. Here's some information. But mental health, as you said earlier, when you send all of this information to people and they're like, I've never heard of this before. Like, I did not have any idea that, I could be contributing to my gut health, which is then affecting my mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, of course, the serotonin, as you said, most of it's actually produced in the gut.
Well, the other thing with antidepressants, which I'm not sure a lot of people know, but antidepressant is designed just to whatever serotonin, there is some in your brain, but it's just meant to hold it there a bit longer. That's all it's designed to do. It's not producing anymore, but this is the problem. It's the symptom of that, right? And that's why people have to go sometimes to 4 or 5 different ones, because they don't work, right? If we treat the root cause of understanding, right, let's pull apart the puzzle that you're eating, and where's your tryptophan? Where's your serotonin coming from? Where's your dopamine responses? Where's your GABA coming from? It doesn't come from anywhere if you don't know what you're doing or what you're eating to not contribute to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm yet to see a patient who doesn't feel better mentally and physically after eating more meat in their diet, regardless of whether they go carnivore or not.
Correct. Yeah.
More meat generally just, better mental health, better physical health as well. What about the negative effects of food on our mental health? Then we've spoken about the positive benefits of meat, but what about the negative effects of other food?
So, I've always said this statement, never underestimate the power of poor nutrition on your mental and metabolic health. It's very powerful. So, when we're talking about processed foods, even like we said before, even plants can impact someone's mental and metabolic health. So if we talk about a process-driven undernourished diet, anxiety, flat moods, bad PMS, PCOS, bad skin, eyesight problems, hair problems, no energy, not good relationships, again, all steeped in self-image, metabolic and mental health. So people drinking Coke every day, no, that's not going to be good for your gut. That's literally probably 1 kilo of sugar a month that you're consuming. Same with artificial sweeteners. Even some in the low keto kind of spaces aren't great either. We've got to be really careful. Even in the keto industry, a lot of that stuff I look at is still junk food. A lot of it is not shouldn't be consumed. So is that kind of answered your question around what that power of bad nutrition has?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I just wanted to kind of touch on things like, sugar and how that, adversely affects mental health, processed food and so on. Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have answered that, yeah.
So, everything from example, like a carbohydrate base. So if we look at cereals or lunches and pastas and things like that most people would consume and probably think that we're quite healthy, what we've got to do is pull back and go, well, they're all going to convert to sugar. They're going to raise your insulin. That's going to keep your blood sugar on a, high of a roller coaster every day. That's then going to affect your moods, which then you're going to be up and feel good. Then you're going to feel down and feel flat. You're going to be tired, and you're going to be at 4 o'clock every afternoon, you want to go and eat a donut. And that's not because, you have any understanding of what's going on, but that's your body screaming to you that I need food, I need nutrition. So if you're constantly on that roller coaster, that's a signal to tell you you are not being fed, you are not being nourished. So those signals for people is just even dragging yourself out of bed every day. We should be waking up, bouncing out of bed, waiting for the day, what we're here to do, right? So sugar, again, it's more addictive on your brain center than it is cocaine. So, and there's enough studies out there now to understand that. So if we understand that, why would we do it to ourselves?
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, there are studies that do show it is potentially more addictive than cocaine. I mean, in fairness, I think they are rodent studies, not on humans, but it's probably not ethical to give people cocaine anymore.
Well, you know what?
Maybe in the past.
Again, if we look at sugar addiction and drug addiction, again, we've got to go root cause, as in there's some, self-image things going on there, but it's all dopamine. It's all that dopamine reaction. Whereas with cocaine, it wears off after a couple of hours. And yes, people can get into that loop, but there's certain personalities that can get caught in that emotionally. Whereas with sugar, it's a legal drug. Everyone's doing it every day with the same concept of hit dopamine, comes down, then we go get more because it's cheap. That's the problem.
Yeah. And it's not just a legal drug. It is pushed on people. I mean, it's pushed onto kids by their parents.
Yes.
It's pushed, not necessarily intentionally, of course, but
No.
it's pushed by society, shops, government,
Yeah.
all these agencies, diabetic associations, heart associations, all of them telling us, go and eat sugar, basically.
Yeah.
And it's a drug. It's insane.
It's a drug. Well, it's funny. I saw a post yesterday with one of the doctors in Sydney, and she was looking at the American Cancer Society recommended putting ice cream on cake instead of icing.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the diabetic industry. I was gobsmacked when I heard that if you have too many carbs, just feed yourself more insulin.
Yeah.
Let's maybe just understand that it's a carbohydrate intolerance issue. And you're right. We're led to believe, and we hear the things that, we can't survive without carbs, and, it's dangerous eating, meat forever. Really, because the thing is too, what we've got to do is look at long-term low-carb carnivore, even carnivore way of eating. None of us are dead.
Yeah.
We're not sick. So again, it's a matter of going, it's a lifestyle thing, but it also very uniquely sits with what someone needs to feed and nourish themselves correctly. And then they can make a decision. When you get your health back, then you eat something and you go backwards. I had a client actually that did that. She was off fruit for, the whole protocol, because she was actually a disordered eating client, and then added fruit back in. And she messaged me. She said, I feel really depressed and I don't know why. And I said, oh, just tell me what else is going on. And she's like, oh, I've added some fruit back in. And I said, how often? She's like, oh, every night. And I said, are you doing it because you want it, or are you doing it because it's habit now? And she's like, oh. I said, take it out, give it 2 weeks and see what happens. Disappeared.
Yeah.
Her whole mood came back. So the alert system for a lot of people is go, well, how could fruit do that? Fructose is not good on the brain if we're overloading it. Yeah. It's still sugar. Sugar.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we're told fruit is good, eat a rainbow, as colorful as possible, all this, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet it's
and we
not
know where that comes from.
Yeah.
We know where that comes from. It comes from profits. But again, it's understanding those and educating and helping people with the information that, like I said earlier, if someone's put on a keto diet for epilepsy, why wouldn't we put someone on that for depression or schizoid disorder?
Yeah. Exactly. Why not? And I mean, I have patients with those conditions. We've done carnivore diets and they've all improved.
Yes, there you go.
And there are case studies out there showing keto can improve things like schizophrenia, PTSD, these kinds of things, which you think, how is PTSD even nutritionally involved? But it still can help. I mean, you touched on something there that I think is really important, actually, because, a lot of nutritional science is based around observational studies, epidemiology studies, very, very poor studies. Yet no one looks at the biggest epidemiological study of all, in that we've been, we're still here.
Yes.
For 4 or 5 million years, we've been eating meat and we're still here.
Yeah. Yes, correct.
It's probably not that bad for us,
I know. And if I look at my grandparents, it was nothing to show up at my grandparents and have a big bit of meat with some eggs and butter and tripe and organs. And I grew up on that, right? So I think it's, thank goodness now when I think about it, but that was normal. That was the normal space of what you ate. But then we know where that kind of transpired with good old Ansel Keys kind of getting in the mix there. But you're right. Again, if you look at long-term, whether it's ketogenic or carnivore eaters, even now, even the girl, the rancher in Canada, she's like 82. Have you seen her?
I saw that photo. Dr. Baker posted it with Dr. Chaffee, and it's like, no, she's like, must be like 40 something. Like, she looks almost younger than Dr. Chaffee, and he's 42, I think. It's like,
yes, he is.
She is not. I don't know.
82.
Insane. She's been doing carnivore for 65 years, I think I saw. Yeah, crazy.
Yep. And
Shows
this is the thing.
Well, like you said, it's the Benjamin Button aging backwards.
Yes. But even, tribally, we've got to really look at the history of tribes, even, what people are eating now. It's just been like that for millennia, and they're all good and they're surviving. And the rates of even things like ADHD and depressive anxiety disorders, if you go there, they don't exist.
No,
none of them exist.
No, they don't. And there's people out there, to be fair, that would say, well, they're just not seeing doctors, they're not getting diagnosed, but then you look at things like Weston A. Price, the
Yes.
dentist, going
Love
out
him.
and saying, but all these people have just absolutely perfect dentition. They've never seen a dentist. They don't brush their
Yes.
teeth. They don't use toothpaste. They don't have fluoride in their water. They're just
Correct.
living off the
That's
land.
other thing.
And they've got absolutely perfect teeth.
Yes.
Yes. And
Yes.
what animal out there, like what, when was the last time you saw a lion with ADHD? Or a zebra with something,
Or lounging around, not being able to get up and hunt for food, right?
Yeah. And like autoimmune diseases and tigers with hypothyroidism, and
Correct.
human beings are the only animal on the planet that does not know what to eat.
I know, and this is the thing. Crazy. Like, we don't need meal plans. We don't need to be told breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snack, and this is the calories and count your macros. This is where it's all gone wrong. And again, though, we look about environmental toxins. I'm a massive component of making sure that we're not drinking tap water or even bottled water. I have a Japanese machine on my sink that literally is an ionizer, so it actually rebalances all the water. It takes out all the toxins, but it also makes it 9.5. So it's an ionized state of water, and it's actually more hydrating because it also shifts the molecules of the water. It makes it smaller. So as it's tap water, the molecules are really big. So when you drink it, you hear it sloshing around in your tummy, right? Most of the time. Whereas the water that I always recommend is ionized water. So the molecules are very small, and they're absorbed immediately into your gut. And it also allows you to hydrate yourself far better than any kind of tap water or bottled water. I've tested every bottled water there is on the market.
Interesting.
And every single time you test it, it goes yellow. So it's on a scale of 2.5 to 2.5 to about 3.5. Looks like urine when you test it. Don't drink it. It's highly acidic.
Nobody really wants to drink urine.
No. But this is the thing. We're also led to believe that bottled water is healthier than tap water. But when you test it, it's actually also in plastic, which then has phthalates, and it's also endocrine disruptors.
Yeah.
But it's all yellow.
Interesting.
So when you test my water, it goes purple.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to discuss that maybe next time.
Yeah.
To come on again. But I'm conscious of time because we've already gone through
all good.
the 2 Zoom meetings. So we've been about an hour and a half now. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So is there anything, Natalie? We've touched on a lot of things today, and I've certainly learned some stuff from you. It's been absolutely great. Hopefully all my viewers and listeners have learned something as well. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you do want to quickly mention at all?
I think one of the biggest things I want people to know is, 1, you're not broken, and 2, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just about you really just haven't been given the tools and the strategies to understand, 1, how your mind works, why it does what it does, and also 2, why your body needs proper nutrition to get you into a full human primal state. So don't blame yourself, but take any information that you hear. Even the amazing work that you're doing is just, never lands in front of someone by accident. That's always my belief. So if you've seen it, listen, explore. People can reach out to me. I have a 30-minute free call if they want to have a chat, and then we can just go from there.
Yeah, perfect. How can people find you?
Yeah, you can stalk me on Facebook or Instagram or on my website, which, you obviously have all in the notes. Or just DM me through Instagram. No problem at all.
Yeah, perfect. So you offer free half-hour consultations.
Yes.
So people can get to know you and then see if they like what you're talking about, and then hopefully get some help from you down the line. So I'll make sure to put all of those links in the description for the episodes on the podcast and on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie,
Thank
for coming
you.
on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I was really looking forward to talking to you and learning some stuff from you. And you certainly have not disappointed.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Hopefully all my viewers and listeners have learned a lot as well. And thank you for persevering with the recording issues. I think I might just have to change my software. It's just getting a bit annoying. But anyway,
Oh, good.
thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on the show. Have a great day.
Thank you. I will. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of the Meet Medi podcast. Hopefully, you've all learned something today from Natalie West, the nutritional psychologist. Thank you so much for coming on today's show, Natalie.
Thank you. Loved it.
Bye, guys.